There were 21 failed attack attempts to subjugate the Algerian state between 1500 and 1800 by various European countries. Today we will learn about them and their events. Peace be upon you, I am Mohamed Doumir. And before we start, we have to say that this is ancient history with many events. As the saying goes, you may know something, but many things remain unknown to you. I've summarized the events a lot so that I can fit them into a single video without it being too long or boring, and there are events and details that are worth mentioning. God willing, I will cover those in future videos. You will find the references and sources at the bottom of the video for anyone who wants to go deeper or continue their research. We are now in the year 1500 AD. Algeria is made up of small states and kingdoms of varying strength and size. Their leaders are not on good terms with each other. The region's economic situation is a bit tough. Spanish ships roam the shores of Oran, and no one is able to drive them away. The last strongholds of Muslims in Andalusia fell 10 years ago, and here are its Muslims boarding death boats to migrate to Muslim lands, fleeing persecution, killing, and forced conversion that was being inflicted upon them. Most of them chose to migrate to Algeria, specifically Bani Mazghana, which before their arrival was just a coastal city. And now it is bustling with them. And here is Spain pursuing them with the sword of its oppression, raiding Béjaïa, Cherchel, and Ténès. Wherever the Muslims of Andalusia fled, it pursued them. In 1501, the Portuguese were the first to dare attack an Algerian city after the fall of Andalusia, namely Oran. Its people resisted them fiercely despite their military weakness at the time. But 4 years later, the Spanish chose to first occupy Mers el-Kebir, and they actually occupied it in 1505. Its occupation was led by the famous Spanish commander Pedro Navarro. He cut off the people of Oran from the sea until 1509, and then he entered the city of Oran. And the first thing he did, record this, oh history, he burned all the books, which shows that this was a crusade against Islam and identity, and not just piracy or greed for land. And a year later, in 1510, the same Pedro Navarro captured Béjaïa, and he tried to enter Algiers, Bani Mazghana. But he faced great difficulty, especially since there were a large number of Andalusian refugees there who were very fierce and held deep resentment against the Spanish. However, he did occupy a small island called the Rock Island, located just a few hundred meters off the coast of Algiers. He built a fortress there and turned it into a watchful eye over Algiers, preparing for its invasion. The people of Algiers couldn't stand up to them and were forced to seek help from Muslim sailors renowned for their strength at sea. The Barbarossa brothers Arouj and Khair ad-Din. They answered the call and came with men from the sea raiders, and with their might the city of Algiers was secured. In 1516, the Spanish decided to eliminate the Barbarossa brothers when they saw the threat their presence posed. So they sent a force from Oran led by Diego de Vera, and the people of Algiers learned of this. Their plan was to allow them to land at Bab el-Wed, pretending to withdraw and show fear. Some of them sneaked onto the Spanish ships, set them on fire, killed and captured the Spaniards, and liberated the rock island opposite the shore from Spanish presence. And after 3 years, that means we're now in 1519. And Europe is now almost unified under the banner of Emperor Charles V, or Charles Quint. He decided to send an army to invade Algeria. He gathered a large Spanish and Italian force for this army, but when they arrived, the Algerians, led by Khairuddin Barbarossa, confronted them with all their strength and resilience. And in a very brief battle, the matter was settled by burning and sinking the invaders' ships off the coast of Algiers and attacking them with fierce determination. Their commander de Moncada only survived because he hid among the corpses pretending to be dead and managed to escape back to Italy. By the end of this battle, Khairuddin Barbarossa and the Algerians had captured 3,036 Spaniards. And when Charles V sent a ransom for them, Barbarossa executed them all. And when the envoy asked to buy their bodies as corpses, he threw them into the sea and harshly told him, "Tell their families that the graves of your sons are the waves of the sea." The Algerians were greatly impressed by Khairuddin's courage and cunning in facing the Catholics. He gained more and more allegiance from the people of Ténès, Mitidja, and other cities. He decided to make the African coast even more fortified and secure against the Europeans. So he began corresponding with tribal leaders asking for their allegiance and unity. And in 1523, the same Italian commander de Moncada launched a similar attack on Algiers. But this time he did not survive. He was also killed along with his soldiers on his own land. In 1529, a massive Spanish force suddenly landed on the Rock Island, which we mentioned is opposite the city of Algiers. The Algerians were unable to repel them. So Khairuddin Barbarossa thought it best to request support from the Ottoman Sultan in Istanbul, who sent him 2,000 naval soldiers and many cannons. With these forces, he besieged the island for 22 days until he destroyed it, stormed it, and executed everyone inside, including the commander of this campaign. And in 1540, Emperor Charles V learned that Khairuddin Barbarossa had left Algiers and headed to Constantinople. So he decided to seize this opportunity and uttered his famous phrase, "I will go myself to wipe out this ragtag Algerian dynasty." I have previously made a dedicated video about this attack, and how the emperor suffered the greatest defeat of his life because of the meticulous preparations of the Algerians. And because of the verse of cold rain and wind, most of his ships sank just because of the winds, and he threw his crown into the sea and left thousands of soldiers as prisoners among the Algerians. It was even said that in that year, the price of a Christian prisoner was just a single onion. The Algerians were able to rest and breathe easy for 17 years, until the Spaniards betrayed them once again with another attack. But this time it was against the city of Mostaganem in 1558, led by Don Martin. His father died in the fighting, and he himself was captured and sold as a slave in the slave market in Algiers. The emperor bought him back with a huge ransom of 23,000 scudi. There were no significant damages recorded from this attack on the Algerians, but everyone in Europe realized how unyielding this land was and how these shores were too difficult to breach to serve as an entry point for occupying Algeria. So, they avoided clashing with its people for nearly 50 years, and during that period many peace treaties were made with Algeria, while Algerian ships dominated the sea, their flags flying high with strength and pride. Then came the year 1620, when the King of Britain decided to invade Algeria, but he did not succeed. This was the first time Britain got involved. He tried again in 1655, relying on the power of his cannons, which kept bombarding Algiers for several nights, hoping its ruler would send a signal of surrender. But all they received was counter-bombardment on their ships, and they were forced to withdraw. And then, 2 years later, in 1657, on May 3rd, the Italians and Spaniards attacked Algiers, and this assault was very painful. They landed with strong armor and fierce fighters, and the capital fell into their hands for about 2 weeks before they were forced to flee under the pressure of resistance and the help of neighboring tribes. But it was the most painful blow to the Algerians in that century. And in 1664, France entered the scene for the first time after receiving support from both Britain and Malta, and with funding from the church, and chose to enter through the city of Jijel, landing there on July 22nd, 1664, with an army of 5,600 soldiers carried by more than 20 ships. The people of Jijel were not prepared for such a sudden invasion, so they retreated to the mountains and sent for help from Constantine and Algiers. They continued to organize and prepare to liberate Jijel for 3 months. On November 1st, 1664, they decided to launch an attack led by Sheikh Ali al-Simukrani and another leader named Mohammed. The plan was to sneak quietly through the trees and attack all at once on a single signal. In the blink of an eye, they attacked with force, slaughtering hundreds of them, and the invaders retreated in panic. But at what cost? After a third of them had been killed. That means more than 2,000 Frenchmen died instantly, and in the year 1682, the French kingdom made its second attempt to invade Algeria. After they had prepared well with modern cannons, they besieged the city of Algiers and kept bombarding civilians until their naval cannons destroyed 200 homes. What's strange about these French attacks is that they started launching them as quick raids for 7 years. So every now and then you'd hear the sound of explosions in the capital. What's going on? It's a new French raid. It was as if they wanted to drain Algerian strength so that its people would surrender, but it was only without any ground landing. That is, naval bombardment from afar, then a swift withdrawal. And on August 24th, 1665, Algerian ships intercepted those French bombers and engaged in fierce combat with them off the coast of Churchill. We don't know much about what happened that day, except that Algeria lost some of its strongest ships, the Hilal, the Shams, and the White Horse. And the Nakhla, these advanced cannon-equipped ships were heavily damaged and needed a long time to return to service. In 1688, the King of France, Louis XIV, sent a letter to the Dey offering him the chance to surrender. Otherwise, the next bombardment would be even fiercer. However, the Dey expelled the envoy and told him, "From today, we will allow you to fire a single shot at Algiers." And he mobilized all the state's resources solely to confront this French threat. He began intercepting and sinking French naval ships, even attacking them deep at sea. Indeed, that was the last time those French cannons came close to the shores of Algiers. Afterwards, Algiers and France signed a peace treaty in 1672. Britain broke its pact with the Algerians and launched a naval assault, destroying 26 frigates. Algiers nearly fell that day, if not for the rapid support from neighboring regions. But the tables turned, and the Algerians captured all the British ships, 323 in total, including their crews. So they lost 26 but gained 323. Afterwards, Britain managed to ransom its prisoners, but at a hefty price. Then came a period of peace for Algiers, during which it became more unified and began to further develop its military industry up until the year 1770. Then Denmark entered the scene in what became known as the Danish-Algerian War. The story with Denmark is that it made an agreement with Norway to put an end to Algeria's control over the Mediterranean Sea. In other words, they had no desire or intention to occupy, but only to break Algeria's power and impose conditions and restrictions on Algerian movements at sea. On May 16, 1770, the Danish and Norwegian war fleets set sail towards Algiers, intercepting and fiercely bombarding the defending ships along the way until they reached Algiers itself, where they began exchanging explosive projectiles. But the Algerians were unable to stop this Danish bombardment of their city for more than a whole year, until, on one occasion, supply ships arrived from Copenhagen to provide the armies with provisions and gunpowder, but the ships brought with them typhoid fever, which struck the soldiers, leaving them incapacitated, plagued by fever and diarrhea. The Algerians infiltrated them, and it would have been better if they hadn't. The Algerians captured them, seized their ships, and forced Denmark to sign a surrender treaty that cost them a great deal of money to ransom their prisoners. But these prisoners left behind in Algeria this disease, which spread among its population for a period of time, and then, 4 years later, that is, we are now in the year 1775. In that year, King Charles III of Spain ordered the mobilization of a massive amphibious force to invade Algeria in every sense of the word. He put at the disposal of this campaign all his wealth and the resources of his state. More than 300 ships appeared off the coast of Algiers on July 8th, anchored on a sandy shore, and began landing soldiers and bombers who started random shelling to spread destruction among the Algerians. The plan was to land powerful cannons mounted on wheels, drag them close to the fortifications, and bombard them directly instead of relying on long-range naval shelling. But the first obstacle they faced was that the guide who chose the landing point brought them down on a soft sandy beach, so they couldn't drag the cannons, and the commander ordered them to leave the cannons and told them to advance towards the fortifications with only their rifles. The Algerians' plan was always to make a tactical retreat into the mountains and then circle around the invaders. And indeed, they managed to kill a quarter of the soldiers and capture another quarter using this tactic, while the rest fled to the ships and the invaders retreated, leaving thousands of prisoners and their advanced cannons behind on the beach. On that day, the Spanish lost 13,000 soldiers compared to 300 Algerians. And on July 12, 1784, the Spanish attacked Algeria once again. And if you notice, the Europeans started choosing the summer season for their attacks on Algeria. They believed that the failure of most of their previous attacks was due to the winter winds and waves. This attack, although it is historically called a Spanish attack, however, most of the European forces participated in it, including Portugal, Malta, Naples, and Sicily, with more than 130 warships gathered. They arrived in Algeria on July 9th and began the bombardment, and the Algerians responded with heavy shelling. In the evening, the Portuguese fleet arrived, and their bombardment was even more intense against the Algerians. The Knights of Malta became more encouraged and carried out a very daring operation, deciding to land at the port and begin a ground assault. But the Algerians quickly killed 50 of them and forced the rest to retreat back to their ships, pursuing them with those primitive hand grenades. After days of siege and bombardment, the invaders withdrew without achieving any results. By the way, this was the largest bombardment operation against Algiers in its history, with a total of 16,600 explosive shells falling on the heads of the Algerians. And this was the last attack on Algiers in that century, meaning during the period from 1500 to 1800. As for the 19th century, there was a British attack in 1816 which was unsuccessful, then the French attack in 1830, through which France managed to occupy Algeria, marking the beginning of a series of successive resistances that culminated in the November Revolution, which became the most famous liberation revolution in the modern world, thanks to the courage and valor shown by the Algerians until sovereignty was restored in 1962. This was a summary of the most significant European attacks on Algeria during that period. I hope this adds to your historical knowledge. I also hope you will help me by sharing this historical information, especially with young people who see it, by engaging and sharing the videos.